He gave his opinion that Lieutenant Michael M.C. Q's theory of a souvenir bullet that found its way into the coal bin and consequently into the blazing stove was plausible, but not probable. Lieutenant M.C. Q based his theory, it was reported yesterday, on the fact that Miss Briscoe kept a number of cartridges as souvenirs in a small tray on her desk. While he said he knew little of mining practice, Dr. Wood declared he believed the detonating cap theory was the most probable. Such a contrivance, he explained, could have been mixed up in almost any delivery of coal, and would have power enough to drive part of the metal container with tremendous force. At this stage of the investigation, the author was communicated with by telephone and asked if he would like to investigate the case. He at once replied in the affirmative, and just before noon on January 3, 1935, accompanied by Lieutenant H. Lawrence Gow, Ordnance Reserve explosives expert, he interviewed Mr. Briscoe and Miss Briscoe's brother-in-law, Admiral Pye. As a result of this interview, the author and Lieutenant Gow decided to examine the furnace and to search the ashes in spite of the fact that they had already been thoroughly searched and screened, as was reported in the press. They therefore proceeded to the Briscoe home, and on looking at the pile of ashes which had been removed from the furnace, almost at once observed lying among the clinkers a hank of charred insulated wire, obviously the wiring of an electric blasting cap. This find, of course, definitely cleared up any remaining doubts as to what had happened. Note that for 5 hours detectives and policemen screened every bit of ash. Yet they found nothing, though the clue to the solution of the whole mystery was before them all the time, plainly visible among the clinkers. The trouble was simply that it requires an explosives expert to know what to look for in such a case. The sequel is given in the next day's papers as follows. Baltimore News, January 5, 1935. The official report by scientists which ripped away the veil of mystery which has surrounded the tragic death of Miss Kate Briscoe, telling how she, by the explosion of a detonator, was hung to State's Attorney J. Bernard Wells today. The report was made by Dr. Howard Maldius, city autopsy physician, Drive W. B. D. Penniman, city chemist, and Dr. Robert W. Wood, professor of experimental physics at Johns Hopkins University. It revealed that 2 Army officers had searched the ashes of the furnace of the Briscoe home, 209 West Lanvale Street, for the second time and had found the rest of the detonator of the type used in mines which killed Miss Briscoe. Following is the report in part. TT seems that Miss Briscoe went to her cellar to inspect some trunks in storage there, and incidentally placed some soft coal on the furnace fire. An explosion must have taken place, and a fragment of metal, brass, or copper was projected with such force that it penetrated the breastbone, muscular tissue, etc. of Miss Briscoe, and entering the lung, perforated the pulmonary artery, and gave rise to the hemorrhage that caused her death almost immediately. At the autopsy, a small fragment of brass or copper was found by Dr. Maldius. This small piece of metal evidently originated as part of an explosive casing, and the explosive was one of high power. It was known to all of us that the use of explosive in coal mining is common practice, the charge of blasting powder being set off by a detonator cap containing fulminate of mercury, or some similar material. It is highly useful for the firearms expert to be well informed on explosives in general as well as on ammunition in particular. It is essential for him to be able to tell black powder from smokeless, to be able to tell from looking at a fired shell or a recovered bullet whether black or smokeless powder was used, and to know, from an examination of a fired gun that has not yet been cleaned, whether the last shot was fired with smokeless or with black powder. LT is also extremely desirable for the firearms expert to know as much as possible about how the different explosives act, and in a stick of dynamite or cartridge, as it is called in explosives parlance, a common size is 114 inches in diameter and 8 inches long, particular to avoid several of the more common fallacies and false beliefs that are current. Otherwise, he runs the risk of making inaccurate statements that may be used to his detriment by smart counsel for the opposing side. In addition, he should learn as much as he can about accidents with the different explosives. These matters will therefore be discussed briefly in this place. Dynamite, as was stated before, this is essentially nitroglycerin absorbed in some porous material, such as sawdust or porous earth, kieselguhr. It is a pasty mass, about the consistency of putty, dirty brownish in color, and oily in appearance. Comes in the form of sticks wrapped in waterproof paper. These sticks vary in size according to manufacture and the purpose for which intended, but are generally about 1 to 1.25 inches in diameter and 6 to 8 inches long. Dynamite is sensitive to shock, but is not nearly as dangerous in this respect as is its main ingredient, nitroglycerin. Therefore, anything that causes the nitroglycerin to separate out will increase the danger. This is the reason for the well-known danger of thawing frozen dynamite, for if this operation is performed too fast, there is a tendency to stew out the soup, as it is sometimes called, and cause an explosion. Dynamite is exploded by detonating it with a fulminate cap. It cannot be detonated by setting fire to it, for if it is ignited in small quantities, it will burn quietly with a dull smoky flame. However, if burned in large quantities, it becomes dangerous from the exudation of the nitroglycerin, which will finally detonate from the shock and agitation, popping and crackling, etc., usually accompanying a fire of any size. To use dynamite for blasting, the fulminate blasting cap is crimped onto a piece of slow-burning fuse, known as Bickford fuse, as illustrated in the sketch on page 118. A sufficient length of this fuse is provided, and the cap is crimped onto one end of blasting cap, with fuse attached, embedded in a stick of dynamite ready for inserting in position for firing. When several sticks are to be fired at once, only one has a cap in it, and this one is called the primer. And then embedded into one of the sticks of dynamite using a pointed wooden stick or skewer for this purpose. The other end of the fuse is lighted, and while it is burning slowly toward the cap, the operator removes himself to a safe place. When the flame finally reaches the cap, it explodes, and the resulting shock detonates the dynamite. It is well to realize that there are several different kinds of fuse, burning with different speeds, and the user should always make sure how fast the fuse will burn before using it, else he may not allow enough time between the application of the match and the explosion. In particular, there is a type of fuse known as instantaneous fuse that burns with great rapidity, and serious results might follow the mistaken use of it in place of regular safety fuse, for the explosion would occur at sensibly the same instant that the match was applied to the end of the fuse. Besides using fuse which is lighted with a match to explode the dynamite cap, there is another method which is universally used in commercial blasting, and that is the electrical method. The dynamite cap for electric blasting has two little wires coming out of it. These are twisted on to the ends of a long double strand of insulated wire which leads to a distance sufficient for safety. Before connecting the cap on to the wires, it is embedded in the dynamite, making a suitable hole in the dynamite by the use of a soft wood plug pointed at one end, called a skewer. The operator then places the dynamite in the position desired, after which he goes to the other end of the wire which he connects to a blasting magneto. This is a small box containing a little PRAAEYT on equals 9P equals G towing APAP equals top. Electric blasting cap. Complete. Bottom. Section of electric blasting cap. Compressed explosive. 3B loose explosive. Bridge wire which heats when current is applied and so fires the cap. D. Sulfur and asphalt. E. Asphalt, F. Sulfur. G. Lead-in wires. Dynamo which is arranged so that the armature is spun rapidly when a handle on top of the machine is pushed down. There are some terminals on the outside for connecting the wire. After the wires are properly connected, the handle on top of the machine is raised up as far as it will go, and then when it is desired to fire the dynamite, the handle is pushed down as quickly as possible. This downward motion of the handle spins the armature of the magneto, thus generating the current of electricity which fires the cap. Instead of using the magneto blasting machine as described above, the dynamite can be fired by using batteries. After the dynamite is all prepared as described above, the operator goes to the distant end of the wire and touches one of the two ends to one terminal of the battery and the other end to the other terminal. This completes the circuit and fires the dynamite. Another device for the ignition of explosives, which looks much like an electric cap in general appearance, but acts in a very different manner, is the electric squib, which is used to ignite blasting powder. This is a small tube similar in size to a dynamite cap, hollow at one end, and containing a pair of wires projecting from the other end. When the two wires are connected to the double conductor, and then the blasting magneto is used, the electricity ignites a small charge of powder inside the squib and causes a flame to shoot out the open end. This device can thus be used to explode gunpowder or blasting powder, which goes off by simply being ignited, and does not need any shock like the explosion of a cap to set it off. The following incident illustrates how these electric squibs may sometimes be used to ignite the fuse that explodes the cap that detonates a high explosive. Once the author had occasion to destroy a number of dud artillery shells which were too dangerous to be moved, and he did this as is usual by placing blocks of TNT against the fuse of the dud shell and then exploding the TNT, which caused the consequent explosion of the shell. The only blasting caps available were some number 6 electric caps and some stronger ordinary caps. The electric caps proved too weak to detonate the TNT. They only blew it to pieces without making it go off. It was necessary, therefore, to use the caps which required a fuse. However, it was much preferred to use the magneto-blasting machine, and thus know exactly when the explosion was going to take place. Therefore, a short piece of instantaneous fuse was crimped into the strong blasting cap. Then an electric squib was wired and slipped over the end of instantaneous fuse. Then, when the handle of the blasting machine was pushed down, the squib fired the instantaneous fuse, and this in turn fired the cap which detonated the TNT and destroyed the shell all at the same instant. This was much more satisfactory than lighting a piece of ordinary fuse and then waiting for the explosion to occur. This is especially true in destroying gas shell, where we could take advantage of moments when the wind was blowing directly away and then press down the handle of the magneto with the knowledge that the shell would be blown up instantly. Dynamite detonates with extreme suddenness, or brusqueness, as it is called in explosives parlance. For this reason, when it is exploded in contact with a rock or any similar substance, it will often have a powerful effect, even when it is not capped with mud or dirt or tamped in any way. On the other hand, blasting powder, when exploded under the same conditions, will have little or no effect unless it is well tamped, for it is relatively slow in its action, and unless there is something in the way, the gas will escape without doing much damage. This difference in the action of dynamite and of slower explosives has given rise to the erroneous impression, often quoted, that dynamite always acts downward. There is absolutely nothing in this. If laid on top of a rock, dynamite acts downward. If laid on the side of a rock, it acts sideways. If fastened to the undersurface, it acts upwards. In other words, if it is placed in simple contact with any surface, it acts on that surface, because it explodes with such suddenness that the air all around it does not have time to move, and thus acts as a mild tamping. Of course, if dynamite is tamped, it acts more energetically, and if it is covered, the explosion will exert its greatest effect in the direction of the least resistance. In newspaper accounts and other such places, a profound ignorance of explosives is often revealed in the exaggerated ideas of the effects that a small amount of explosives will have. For instance, we often see an item such as the following: when arrested, the suspect had with him a suitcase containing enough dynamite to wreck several city blocks. This is ridiculous on the face of it. A suitcase full of dynamite would surely do enough damage if it were exploded in a crowd, as was the Wall Street bomb of a few years ago. But it would not wreck even one good-sized office building, let alone a city block. Of course, it would blow all the windows out of the front of a building, or it might start a fire that would wreck the building. But the actual structural damage that even a suitcase full of dynamite would do to a modern steel-framed office building is small. One stick of dynamite, when used properly, will cut a steel railroad rail, and one stick will blow a hole perhaps 2 feet in diameter in a good strong brick wall. But that is about all. When a very large quantity of dynamite explodes at one time, the results naturally are spectacular. One of the largest recorded dynamite explosions occurred near the place where this is being written when the steamer Alamchine, loaded with dynamite, exploded in the lower harbor of Baltimore on November 7, 1913. The ship was not allowed to come into the inner harbor, as the regulations forbid the unloading of explosives there, which was a very wise provision, as the subsequent events showed. The steamer, carrying a full cargo of dynamite, was being unloaded onto barges, with the aid of 2 tugboats, when in some unknown manner a detonation occurred, which involved all the dynamite on the ship and on the barge which was alongside. The steamer, the 2 tugboats, and the barge were instantly demolished, with the loss of about 60 lives, as every person on any of the vessels involved was killed by the terrific blast. Peculiarly enough, the concussion was felt much more severely at several distant points than it was in nearby Baltimore, where no very great damage was done. Somewhat surprisingly, the hull of the Alamchine was not blown to bits, as might have been expected, but held together essentially in one mass, with the result that a costly job of clearing the harbor was involved. Trinitrotoluol, or TNT. This is a yellowish substance, somewhat resembling sulfur in appearance, though it is not quite as bright in color. Also, like sulfur, it can be melted and molded into any desired shape. TNT, or a similar explosive, tetrol, is often seen in the form of demolition blocks used by the Army engineers. These blocks are made of melted explosive, molded to form and afterward copper-plated, so that they look very much like solid blocks of copper, about 2 inches square and 4 inches long, with a hole in one end just large enough to receive a blasting cap. To explode one of these blocks, a cap is crimped onto the end of a piece of fuse and then inserted into the hole in the end of the block. The block is placed in the desired position, the fuse lighted, and the operator leaves the vicinity until after the explosion occurs. Or, more conveniently, an electric cap is used in connection with the magneto-blasting machine. TNT is so relatively insensitive that a good strong cap is required. If a weak one is used, it may simply pulverize the block of TNT without making it explode. TNT is a very strong explosive, but at the same time a very safe one to handle, as it is so extremely insensitive to shock that a rifle bullet can be fired into it without causing detonation, and it can be burned in small quantities without danger of explosion. However, if burned in very large quantities, it has been known to explode after the fire has assumed very large proportions and the heat has become very intense. Probably the long exposure to extreme temperatures during a big fire may change a part of the mass into some other compound that is more sensitive than the ordinary TNT, and the great heat and pressure, coupled with the agitation, crackling, boiling, rumbling, etc., accompanying the conflagration, may cause some of these sensitive compounds finally to detonate and thus start the mass. For years it was thought by authorities on explosive that TNT could not be detonated under any circumstances merely by burning, as has been described above. But at least 2 disastrous explosions have occurred as a result of TNT fires. The first was the explosion on December 6, 1917, of a munitions ship loaded with TNT in the harbor of Halifax, as the result of fire following a collision. There were said to have been some drums of gasoline on the foredeck, while the hold was full of TNT. The gasoline took fire as a result of the collision, and the flames got beyond control and spread to the TNT in the hold. The crew left in small boats and rowed away as fast as they could. About 20 minutes later, the whole shipload of TNT detonated, laying about 1/3 of the city in ruin and killing 26 persons outright, with 400 others missing. The largest explosion on record occurred on July 10, 1926, at the Naval Ammunition Depot, Lake Denmark, N.J., as a result of a fire following a stroke of lightning. The building struck contained an enormous quantity of TNT, and this took fire after burning fiercely for about 20 minutes. The building detonated, with an appalling loss of life and property. A few minutes later, a second building, containing 6 million pounds of TNT, also detonated. These 2 initial explosions were followed at intervals by many others, as fires were started in many parts of the depot, and one building after another burned and blew up. The property loss was about $85 million. The author was fortunate enough to be able to visit the scene of the explosion immediately after it occurred, and, in fact, before the secondary fires had died out. The layman invariably speaks of any major disaster occurring from explosives as an explosion, but the professional powderman has a definite term for referring to the different types. Thus he would speak of a smokeless powder fire as a flare, a black powder explosion as a blow, and a dynamite explosion as a blast. Accidents with ammunition, small arms ammunition, in the form of cartridges, is not likely to be the cause of an accident, for it is very difficult to make it explode unless it is in a gun. Moreover, ammunition, especially when it is loaded with smokeless powder, does not explode with much violence unless it is confined in the chamber of a weapon. The only way to set off a cartridge not in a gun is to heat the cartridge, or to strike the primer just right. If cartridges are burned in an open fire, the cartridge case will be ruptured by the pressure of the burning powder inside, and at that instant the pressure will all escape without projecting the bullet with any great velocity, as most people mistakenly suppose it will. The greatest danger in such a case is from flying particles of brass, which might endanger the eyesight. For this reason, the practical joker who threw a whole bandolier of rifle cartridges into a campfire, and then stood there grinning at people who were frightened enough to run, did not show very good judgment, even though all that happened was the scattering of the embers to the accompaniment of a popping like that made by a string of firecrackers. Recently, a child sitting on the floor by a fireplace had both eyes put out by the explosion of a cartridge that had been swept into the fire by accident. But of course the child had its face right by the fire, and it is no wonder that trouble resulted. Working with military machine guns, which sometimes jam when they are red hot, will furnish many opportunities for observation of what a cartridge will do when exploded from the heat. The author, who for years was in charge of various machine gun testing and development work in the Army, has been able to make some interesting observations along this line. Once, on the Mexican border before the World War, he attempted to clear a hot gun, which had jammed with the breech half open, by pushing the live cartridge out with a ramrod inserted in the muzzle. Just as the rod touched the bullet, the cartridge exploded from the heat. As the breech was open, the cartridge case blew out at the back, and the bullet, resting against the rod, did not move. Again, while the author was lying behind a hot gun, a cartridge extracted from it exploded as it struck the ground not over 18 inches from his face. At a test of machine guns, a live cartridge ejected from a hot gun exploded in the air, and the bullet stuck in the starched cuff of a spectator standing by the side of the gun. Rough handling can also explode cartridges outside of the gun. A girl working in the cartridge factory was shoveling .45 pistol cartridges out of a bin with a wooden scoop. One of them exploded, and the empty case struck the girl in the left breast, inflicting a slight cut in the skin. Various cases such as this have been known, and in none of them was there any serious injury. It should be quite evident from the statements made above that there is no great danger from cartridges. If, for example, there is a fire involving a hardware store where a moderate quantity of ammunition is stored. Bombs, the way the assassin generally uses an explosive, is in the form of a bomb. That is, some stout metal container which will be blown to bits by the explosive, and which will cause injury or death by flying fragments. In investigating any such incident, look particularly for any bits of iron, steel, wire, particles of copper cap, etc. Also note carefully the character of the residue, if there is any left, or of the smoke or smudge left by the explosion. A competent explosives chemist can analyze the residue and tell what kind of explosive was used. The officer investigating any such case should take extreme precautions to prevent spectators or curiosity seekers from picking up objects, touching anything, or approaching closely enough to change the appearance of the objects involved. The following case, reported by Lieutenant H. Lawrence Gow, Ordnance Reserve, who was called in as an explosives expert by the Maryland State Police during the investigation, will give an idea of the work in connection with explosives that the expert may be called on to do, as well as the importance of suitable precautions by the local authorities to preserve the evidence until a proper examination can be made. In this instance, both the state police and their expert were much handicapped by a lack of such precautions, as will be seen. Moreover, this case will give the reader a very good idea of the effects of a small quantity of dynamite. For Lieutenant Gow estimates that the damage was caused by approximately 2 sticks of dynamite, or an equivalent amount of some other high explosive, exploded under the left floorboards of the car. The Kirk murder case on January 7, 1933, Miss Ida Kirk, of Budds Creek, Maryland, was fatally injured by a mysterious explosion under the floorboards of her Buick coupe. She had just started the car, and together with another woman as a passenger, had started to Ward, Washington. After she had driven about a mile, the explosion occurred. The condition of the car when it was found was described as follows: all glass out of both doors, windshield, rear window, and headlights. Gasoline tank leaking slightly. Right door jammed, left door sitting open. Right hand running board and fenders torn loose from body. Entire hood missing and found in a field about 40 feet from the road. Air cleaner on carburetor hanging loose. Steering wheel bent upward and slightly forward. Drive shaft housing bent to the right and slightly upward. Forward part of muffler completely demolished. Left-hand side of chassis immediately under dash was bent outward and downward, and bent again in same condition at a point between clutch pedals and seat. Metal tray for tools under seat bent U-ward in a V shape. Floorboards completely demolished and all pieces pointing upwards with the exception of the extreme right side under dash. Rear left tire flat. Slight hole in left-hand side of radiator inside. Left-hand running board torn loose. From the body. When the expert arrived, the burn or smudge on the roadway, about 4 feet square, had been washed off. The metal parts and debris of the explosion had been swept off the road into the weeds on each side, and souvenir hunters and curiosity seekers had been allowed to overrun the place and carry off small pieces, etc. Lieutenant Gao states that one man had to be threatened with arrest before he would give up a piece of the floorboard of the car that he had taken, and that the expert wanted for examination. Gas explosions. Any explosion occurring in this day and time is pretty apt to be blamed on a bomb or some high explosive, and much mystery is frequently wrapped around what is often to prove a purely natural chain of circumstances. But the fact is that a majority of the explosions which occur in small homes throughout the larger cities, and which do not seem to have any cause or reason, can be laid to a spontaneous ignition of some natural, but unusual formation of explosive gases, which have seeped into some part of the building and finally ignited. In these modern times, there is every possibility that inflammable gases from gasoline, illuminating gas, fuel oil, coal gas from a heater, or even some type of sewer gas might gradually fill up a basement or other closed room of a building and then explode. The investigator should not be too much inclined to accept some sensational theory to account for an explosion amongst people who have led lawful normal lives, and where no motive for foul play appears. It is well for the reader to know something of the way that gas explosions act, and the characteristic differences between them and other types. Gas explosions are more likely to be large in volume, and with a decided capacity to exert power on large objects like floors, walls, partitions, etc., and they move these things rather than rending them to pieces as does dynamite or some other high explosive. The high explosive will shatter and rend the things which are near it, while those that are a reasonable distance away will not be injured, unless it be by flying fragments. The gas explosion, on the other hand, will move large objects about but will not shatter them, and the effect is more generalized than is the intensely local effect of a detonation. Gas explosions are more of a push, distributed over a large area. An explosion of low intensity, but with considerable total power because it covers so much space. The expert will readily distinguish between the wide general effects of a gas explosion and the more intense but localized effects of dynamite or high explosive. As an example of the effects of a gas explosion, a rather severe blast in the cellar of a small house lifted it from its foundations and turned it slightly, so that it was a foot or more out of position. The detectives were at first inclined to believe that it was a bomb explosion, but an expert pointed out that dynamite would have shattered or blown a hole through the side of the wall without lifting the entire house bodily, and that an explosion that could have lifted the whole house without doing any severe local damage must have been of low unit intensity yet must have had a considerable total power. In other words, a gas explosion from the furnace was indicated as the probable cause. Investigation showed that this opinion was correct. Destroying explosives, if it is necessary for one reason or another to dispose of ammunition or explosives, it is well to know how to do so safely. Black powder is readily destroyed by the action of water, which dissolves out the saltpeter, and thus renders the remaining ingredients harmless. Smokeless powder cannot be disposed of in this way, because it is impervious to water. It is best disposed of by spreading it in very small quantities on the ground and burning it. Fulminate of mercury is dissolved by hydrochloric acid. Small arms primers in bulk are dangerous. They are best destroyed by throwing them into a deep body of water. Cartridges in small quantities may be destroyed by pulling out the bullets, emptying out the powder and destroying it as described above, and then destroying the primer by snapping it in the arm for which the cartridge was intended. Small collections of individual cartridges may be made entirely safe for handling by cautiously drilling a small hole, using a sharp drill to avoid heating, in the front part of the powder space and emptying all powder out of the case, then squirting a drop or two of oil into the primer, which destroys its action. However, there is really no reason for taking this extreme precaution. Hand grenades, fuses, detonators, artillery ammunition, etc., and especially old ammunition or material of this kind which may have been fired and not exploded, duds, should never be handled, nor should any attempt be made to move or destroy them except by a qualified ordnance expert who knows exactly what the object is, how it is constructed, and what to do with it. Handling duds, one of the most fruitful causes of personal injuries and deaths among civilians in any area which has been the scene of military operations, is the ill-advised disregard of any such caution as has been given in the preceding paragraph. Visitors to the battlefields are usually on the lookout for likely souvenirs, and many times they will pick up the most dangerous possible articles and transport them home, where they may lie for years unnoticed, yet all the time they may be ready at the slightest jar to explode and wreak death and destruction on all in the vicinity. Of course, the war is long past, but the souvenirs that were brought home afterward are still with us. The unfortunate part of all this is that the danger is thus not limited to a war area, but is present in the most unexpected places, and at any time the police may encounter dangerous war souvenirs in the hands of children on the streets or in other places. That this danger is not in the least exaggerated will perhaps be apparent from a consideration of the incident which will now be described. Several years ago, the writer, then executive officer of one of our large government arsenals, received a telephone call from the police department of the neighboring city, one of the largest in the country, stating that they had taken an object from some children who were throwing it around in the street and that it looked like an army bomb. Information was requested. As the writer was just then getting ready to start out on a visit which would take him within a few blocks of the police district headquarters in question, they were told to hold it for his examination. The object proved to be a defensive hand grenade of the most dangerous type. When first observed, the children were attempting to pull out the safety pin, which would have allowed the grenade to explode in 3 seconds if the grenade were loaded and had a live fuse attached. The grenade was in apparently new condition, and no danger was therefore anticipated in unscrewing the fuse or Buchan assembly to see whether or not it was live and loaded. However, when the writer explained what it was, and that he would unscrew the fuse to see whether it was loaded, the several police officers in the room all made for the door, and the captain, with an anguished cry of "Let me out of here," was the first one through. The reader may laugh, but these officers acted with very commendable caution. The grenade was fully loaded. The worst thing about old shells, bombs, fuses, and all such war souvenirs is the fact that they may have deteriorated to such an extent that they will explode if they are merely turned over in the gentlest possible manner. The writer knows of a case where a souvenir shell from the Spanish-American War, which had been in a house for years, exploded when it was turned bottom up for the purpose of reading the stamping on the bottom. Duds, or material that has been fired and has failed to explode, are far more dangerous than in used material, for in the latter there is usually a safety device which remains locked until the shock of firing releases it. Therefore, if any old war material is found, do not handle it at all unless necessary. If it must be handled to remove it from the reach of children or curious persons, move it as gently as possible, and avoid any sudden jars or shocks. Do not turn it over if it can be avoided. The simple act of turning such an object may cause an explosion. The same precaution applies to anything that appears to be a bomb, or to any package or device that may possibly contain explosives. Any such objects should be handled only by men who know about such things, such as some member of the force who has had experience with explosives and bombs, or a member of the bomb squad, if there is one organized. To the firearms expert is a thorough knowledge of the various trade markings to be found stamped on guns and ammunition. For example, the serial number, carried by all modern firearms, enables the gun to be definitely identified at all times in case of theft, etc., if the serial number has previously been recorded. One of the first things to do when any evidence gun is received is to record the number. This makes the identification of an evidence gun in court much simpler than if no such number were present, for the number should be officially recorded as soon as the gun enters the case, and at any time thereafter it will be known whether or not a gun presented in court is the same one, merely by comparing the number with the record. Moreover, the serial number is extremely important when it becomes desirable to trace the origin of a suspected gun, for the maker can tell what dealer obtained the gun, and the dealer will have a record of the person to whom it was sold. Serial numbers. Most modern firearms are marked in a prominent place with the name and caliber of the cartridge for which the gun is intended, and the name of the maker. In many cheap foreign guns, the name of the maker may be omitted, but the caliber designation will practically always appear. In rifles, shotguns, and revolvers, this caliber designation is usually found on the side of the barrel, but in automatic pistols, where the barrel is inside the slide or other part of the gun, the caliber marking will be found in a prominent place. However, these markings do not always pair. The author has before him, as this is being written, a well-made revolver of a good make which has no markings visible except the trademark of the maker. The serial number may appear in any one of several different locations, which vary according to the fancy of the maker. Often the serial number on a revolver may be found on the frame under the wooden stocks, which must be removed to find it. Other times it is found on the frame behind the crane, so that it is visible only when the cylinder is swung out. Again, it may be on the metal part of the frame between the wooden stocks at the bottom of the grip. On automatics, the serial number is often found on the side of the frame. Some very high-grade arms, especially the military ones like the Springfield rifle, are made fully interchangeable so that when a part breaks or wears out, any other similar part may be put in its place without any fitting. In such cases, the serial number is carried on only one principal part of the gun, which usually is the receiver. But with even the best of guns, it is sometimes difficult to achieve such a high degree of interchangeability, and often some hand fitting is necessary for satisfactory results. When this hand fitting of various parts is done, it is customary to mark each part with the same serial number as that of the original gun. Thus, in most arms, nearly every important part will be so marked. With small parts, where there is not room to put on the whole number, the serial number will appear on the frame of the gun, and the small parts will have only the last 2 or 3 figures of the number. For example, if the serial number of a Luger pistol is 1679, the various small parts will each be marked 79. Even in the Springfield rifle, the bolt will often be marked British proof, Mara's London provisional proof, Birmingham provisional proof, London definitive proof, Birmingham definitive proof, London mark for special definitive proof of rifle barrels, Class 10, Birmingham mark for special definitive proof of rifle barrels, Class 10. Chamber mark, breech loading shotguns, bore and length of cartridge. Chamber marks, breech loading rifled arms, caliber and length of cartridge. 9. Nitro proof, London. 10. Nitro proof, Birmingham. 11. Special proof, London. 12. Special proof, Birmingham. 13. Reproved arms, London. 14. Reproved arms, Birmingham. 15. Choke bore mark, London, now obsolete. Upper figure, 12B, shows gauge at breech, lower figure, 14M shows gauge at muzzle, 16. Choke bore mark, Birmingham. 17. An old London mark, now long obsolete. 18. London mark employed prior to new rules adopted in 1925. 19. The broad arrow, sign of government ownership. 20. Another form of the broad arrow. 21. Military proof of rifles and automatic pistols. 22. London definitive proof for arms of foreign make, followed by the words, not English make. Marks numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11 and 12 are treated in a similar way when applied to arms of foreign make after British proof. Consequently, all these marks may be seen with the letter or letters enclosed in a circle, and followed by not English make. PRS RAL with the number of the rifle to which it is fitted, this marking being done with an electric arc after the final fitting. At the present time, in practically every country, the arms manufacturers number all their guns serially by models. But this has not always been the case, for it has not been so long ago that some makers in Germany and elsewhere numbered the guns by orders. If a large dealer ordered, say, 10,000 guns, the first Spanish one would be number 1, the next number 2, eat. And then when another large order was received, another series of numbers might be started, duplicating the ones already used in the last order. The possibility of there being 2 guns of the same serial number thus exists, and should be borne in mind. In the .45 caliber government model, besides the serial number, there are other manufacturers' marks found on most guns. These include the inspector's marks, generally a letter of the alphabet, but sometimes some other mark, symbol, or design. When the gun is in the process of manufacture, each part has to be inspected from time to time, and when the part is finished, it must be checked and gauged to see that it agrees with the drawings and specifications, and these inspector's marks are put on all pieces that pass these tests. Usually there are a number of men on this inspection work, and each one has a distinctive stamp with his initial or some other designating mark, and when he is satisfied that a piece is correct, he stamps his symbol on it. Thus, if there is later a complaint of faulty material, the responsible inspector who allowed the faulty work to get by is known. In addition, when guns are made for the Army or the Spanish proof Maras 1, present Ibar proof. 2. Old Ibar proof under the monarchy. 3. Present Barcelona proof. 4. Old Barcelona proof. 5. Definitive proof for smooth-bore muzzle loading arms. 6. Provisional proof for smooth-bore breech loading or automatic guns. 7%. Definitive proof for the smooth-bore breech loading or automatic guns. 8. Single definitive proof for rifled carbines or muskets. 9. Single definitive proof of low-power pistols and carbines. 10. Single definitive proof of non-automati pistols. 11. Old form of the mark just described. 12. Definitive proof of revolvers. 18. Definitive proof of automatic pistols. 14. Definitive proof of foreign-made arms. 15. Definitive proof of rifled muzzle loaders. 16. Indication that arms have been inspected and meet the required tolerances. 17. Old form of view mark, just described. 18. Supplementary proof of breech loading and automatic shotguns. 19. Old form of last described mark. 20. Second supplementary proof of breech loading automatic shotguns. 21. Single definitive proof of breech loading shotguns. 22. Special proof with excessive overcharge. 23 to 29. These are old marks now superseded. Belgian SCH 14, 15, 16, 17, He 18 Navy. The government inspector has a distinctive official stamp with which he marks the material that meets the specifications. In addition, there are marks and stampings indicating government ownership. The British government uses the well-known symbol of the broad arrow for this purpose. In America, it is customary to mark pistols and revolvers made on government contract, United States property. However, legal authorities should not get unduly excited if they find an obsolete model pistol or revolver bearing this mark in the possession of an individual. 141 For the government has in the past made a practice of selling out-of-date stores bearing this mark, and large quantities of such articles are legitimately in the hands of the public. But if a current service arm, such as the .45 caliber automatic pistol, is found under similar conditions, the possessor should expect to be required to prove his right to have it. A certain number of rifles have been sold to civilian marksmen by the government under authority of Congress. But in every such case, a bill of sale accompanies the arm, and this should be preserved by the purchaser. If this is not available, the Ordnance Department records in Washington will tell whether or not the arm was sold to an individual. The importance of this matter is not always sufficiently realized, as the incident described below will make clear. A competitor at one of the big pistol matches was loaned a government pistol for use in the match, and, as is usual in such cases, was made to put up the price of the gun as security for its return. He applied to be allowed to purchase it, but it is not the present policy of the government to sell pistols to individuals, even though the sale of arms to members of the National Rifle Association is permitted by law. But he wanted the gun, so when the match was over, he reported that he had lost it, and as a result he forfeited his collateral, and considered that he had thus paid for the gun, and that it was his property. But some months later, in Alaska, he was seen to be in possession of a pistol marked United States property, and was asked to explain. He stated that he had bought the gun, but as he could not produce any bill of sale, he was held while the War Department was communicated with. The report was that the gun in question had been reported missing at the national matches, and presumably was stolen. The possessor was at once Belgian proof marks 1. Countermark of the inspector. Any letter may be seen thus surmounted by a star, as the initial of the inspector is used. 2. The monument or perron of Liege, indicating inspection after assembly. 3. A simplified form of the last described mark. It is more often seen as shown here for the mark of acceptance. 5. Acceptance after proof with excessive charge. 6. Optional provisional proof of barrel for muzzle loader. 7. Standard provisional proof. 8. Double proof. 9. Triple proof. 10. Chamber stamp for shotguns. Shows bore dimension and chamber length. 11. Smokeless powder proof. 12. Special test with smokeless powder not officially recognized. This mark indicates test with EC. Powder no. 3. 18. Same as last described mark, showing marking for another type of powder, in this case clermonite. 14. Proof of barrel of low-power target arm. 15. Proof of foreign arms. 16. Unfinished arms to be completed after exportation. 17. Mark indicating proof with a particular kind of smokeless powder. 18. An old definitive proof mark, now obsolete. Locked up, charged with possessing stolen government property, and suffered great inconvenience before the matter could be straightened out. Proof marks besides the marks already described. There is another class of markings on firearms that are very interesting and important to the identification expert. These are the proof marks that are always found on arms made or sold in any of several European countries. The proof marks and their use are stringently regulated by law in the countries where they are used, so that they form a sure method of determining the country of origin of many foreign arms. This is likely to be a matter of considerable importance in the case of cheap firearms of uncertain make, as the proof mark may be the only real clue to the origin of the arm. Moreover, American arms sold in the countries requiring proof marks must bear a mark showing that it is an arm of foreign make which has been tested and found safe for sale. Thus, for example, a Colt revolver bearing the Spanish proof marks must have been sold in Spain. The author has had in his possession several such arms. One is illustrated on page 270 of Textbook of Pistols and Revolvers, and the Spanish proof marks can be seen on the frame where the barrel is screwed in. Before proceeding any further with this subject of proof marks, it is in order to say a word about the proof tests themselves, and the reasons for them. It is almost the universal practice to test all firearms during or following the manufacture, to be sure that they are sufficiently strong to prevent their blowing up in the hands of the user. As the part of a rifle or shotgun most likely to burst is the barrel, many manufacturers make it a practice to test the barrels in the rough, before assembling them into finished guns, by firing a very heavy charge in them, which subjects them to a much greater pressure than they will ever be called on to stand in ordinary service. Thus, if the barrel is weak or the metal is seamy, the rough bored barrel will split open or burst, and the maker will be saved the time and expense of finishing it up. Moreover, French proof marks the Saint Etienne mark for provisional proof of separate shotgun barrels. The Paris mark for the same proof, the Saint Etienne mark for definite proof of barrels finished, and assembled, the Paris mark for the same proof, St. Etienne black powder proof of finished arms. St. Etienne special black powder proof. Paris mark for standard black powder proof. Saint Etienne mark for standard test with smokeless powder, poudre T. Paris mark for this test. 10. Mark placed on arms when ready for sale and delivery. LL mark indicating arms of standard dimensions. 12. Mark placed on arms of foreign make. 13. Proof of rifled arms. 14. Proof of hand weapons. 15. Proof of barrels finished but not assembled. 16. AM Old Saint Etienne mark. 17 to 20. Old marks formerly used at Saint Etienne. 21. Mark used on French government-made arms. 22. A mark placed on foreign-made arms proved at Saint Etienne. Special marks at one time placed on arms made at other French towns. 23. Châtellerault mark, the letter E. 24. Saleville, reversed E in rectangle. 25. Mutzig, E surmounted by a star. 26. Toul, E surmounted by a crown. Note: for double proofs of barrels, the third mark in the top line has two sets of the crown and branches preceding the words Saint Etienne. For triple proofs, 3 sets. In general, any of the marks given twice indicates double proof. 290 to 1 OVIE God. If the barrel should be assembled into a finished gun, and then should burst on the final proof, it would most likely ruin the other expensive parts of the gun, and would thus result in a considerable loss to the maker. Therefore, this first test is very desirable in cases where experience has shown that a certain percentage of the barrels may be expected to fail. Naturally, it is not to be recommended in the case of guns which never have to stand much pressure, such as a .22 short, where the barrel does not ever have to shoot a high-powered cartridge, and where the quality Italian sees Italian National Small Arms Testing Bureau. Identifying mark of the Brescia branch, identifying mark of the Gardone branch, Italian proof house, provisional proof of barrel. Italian proof house. Mark on rifled arms, smokeless powder test. Polvere senza fumo, black powder test. Polvere nero. Mark is added to the ones described above on finished arms. Pa-IAA of the steel used in the barrels is so uniformly high that failures very rarely occur. It is cheaper to put off the testing until the entire gun is finished, for all high-powered arms must be tested after completion, regardless of any previous test of the barrel. This test of the partly finished barrel is what is called a provisional proof. When the entire gun has been finished, it is inspected to see that it is properly and safely made, which is called viewing, and it is then fired with one or more high-pressure charges, and sometimes with regular charges also, which is called the final or definitive proof. In many countries, There are government rules or laws which forbid any gun to be placed on sale which has not passed certain prescribed inspections and proofs. In some countries these tests are made by a government proof house, and in others they are made by a proof establishment operated by a guild or cooperative association of gun makers under government regulation. Some of the most notable proof establishments are those of Liege in Belgium, which was visited by the author several years ago, the Gunmakers Company in London, and the Guardians in Birmingham, which are arms makers' guilds, operating under government sanction, and the proof houses of Eibar and of Barcelona in Spain. In Great Britain, for example, no gun can be placed on sale which has not been proved according to regulations recognized by these establishments. Some countries forbid the importation of unproved arms. For this reason, some American makers submit ABFF8I, LO11-1A provisional proof of barrel, single proof for pistols and revolvers, single proof of rifles and shotguns. Rifle cartridges made by Frankfurt are marked with the initials FA and the date, by month and year, e.g. FA 634. The ammunition made especially for the national matches is sometimes marked with the initials FA and the year, with the letters NM, national match, e.g. FA 31 NM. Some of the ammunition made especially for the matches was marked with the letter R on the head, indicating that the cartridge case was made with the hard rifle anneal for easy extraction. Armor-piercing ammunition has a black tip on the bullet. Formerly, the tracer cartridge had a black case, but it was found that the blackening of the brass by chemical means had a tendency to. These sketches were carefully made from actual samples in the author's possession. Both foreign and domestic ones are shown, and some rather old ones have purposely been included, for very often the cartridge that may figure in #shooting case has been lying forgotten for years. JN, the chamber of some old gun in a household where arms are seldom or never used. 1. Remington 12-gauge shotgun shell. 2. 20-gauge shotgun shell made by Western Cartridge Company. 3. 12-gauge shotgun shell by Peters Cartridge Company. 4. 12-gauge shotgun shell by U.8 Cartridge Company. Note the monogram on the primer. Formerly, it was the practice to place monogram or initial on primers used for smokeless powder. While those intended for black powder were left plain, at present all standard primers are intended for use with smokeless powder, and he work equally well with black so that the initial on the primer is not often used. 5.410 gauge shotgun shell by Winchester Repeating Arms Company. 6.44 metallic shot cartridge for use in rifles. 7.80 caliber Krag cartridge made at Frankfurt Arsenal, November 1904. 8. Cartridge for .577 elephant gun with 750 grain bullet and 110 grains of cordite, made by Kynoch Limited in Great Britain. 9. Section 8mm French service cartridge for the Lebel rifle. 10.455 Webley self-loading pistol cartridge, made by Ely, London, purchased in 1932. 11. Wartime .45 automatic pistol cartridge, Mata by VU8, CT, Company. 12. Foreign 11mm revolver cartridge. 18. 9mm Luger pistol cartridge, made by Deutsche Waffen und Munitionfabriken at Karlsruhe. The number 480C marked on the base is the factory pattern number of this particular cartridge. Other D, W, M pattern numbers are as follows: 403 7.63mm Mauser, 480D 9mm Luger carbine, 413A 6.5mm Bergmann No. 3 484 5mm Clement, 416A 5mm Bergmann No. 2 487 9mm Mauser, 456B 9mm Bergmann. Mars 488 8mm Bergmann Simplex, 466.65 mm Mannlicher, 497 7.65mm Mannlicher carbine or CAR, 471 7.65mm Luger bind pistol, 479 a 7.65mm Mauser, .82 ACP, 508A6, 35 mm automatic, .25 ACP, 4S0 C9mm Luger pistol, 540 69 mm short, 14 9mm Luger pistol cartridge, German make. 15. 9mm cartridge for Bayard Army pistol. 16. .38 Smith & Wesson Special made by Winchester Repeating Arms Company 17. 88 Smith & Wesson Special made by Peters Cartridge Company 18. 380 made by Remington with the old marking .380 CAPH. Colt Auto Pistol Hammerless 19.382 ACP made by Winchester 20. 32 ACP made by Savage marked 32.8 AP. Savage Automatic Pistol 21. 25 OP made by U 8. CTG Company Old 22.250-3000 cartridge made by Savage Arms Company 23. 9mm Browning short cartridge German made 24. 8mm Swiss service cartridge made at Government Factory Altdorf 25.45 caliber pistol cartridge made at Frankfurt Arsenal showing old marking 26. Same showing present method of marking 27.80 caliber M1 rifle cartridge made at Frankfurt. Note that primer is crimped in. 28.60 caliber ball cartridge made at Frankfurt. Caused deterioration of the metal, and now the tracer cartridges have a red tip on the bullet for red tracer and a green tip for green tracer. The armor-piercing cartridges formerly had a black bullet, but now they have a black tip on the bullet. High-pressure proof cartridges are tin-plated and marked on the head with the initials FA and the word test. Beware of such cartridges. Pistol cartridges made by Frankfurt formerly had the initials FA and the month and year of manufacture, but the later ones have only the initials and the year of manufacture. Example of the older markings FA 713. Of the later ones, FA 34. Markings on the heads of .22 rim fire cartridges. Top row, reading from left to right, Dominion Cartridge Company, Federal Cartridge Company, Remington United States Cartridge Company, Peters Cartridge Company. Bottom row, Winchester Repeating Arms Company, Western Cartridge Company, Rhenish Westfälisch Sprengstoff AG, Nobel Western Super X. The U on the Remington cartridge remains from the time when there were two separate companies, the Union Metallic Cartridge Company and the Remington Arms Company. The H on the Winchester cartridges originated when it was the Henry Repeating Arms Co., Dominion Cartridge Company, Montreal, Canada. Marks, Dominion, or D. Imperial Chemical Industries, Limited, of Great Britain-Nobel, or N. Rhenish Westfälisch Sprengstoff, AG. Of Nuremberg, Germany, RWS and the caliber for centerfire cartridges, and the letter R in a shield for rimfire. Some practice cartridges made by this firm are marked U in a shield. Cartridges made by the Deutsche Waffen und Munitions Fabriken of Berlin are marked DWM with the pattern number of the cartridge. For example, the .30 Mauser cartridge is marked 403 and the 9mm Luger 480C, while the stronger Luger cartridge intended for the carbine is marked 480D. Sometimes Luger cartridges with a black case may be encountered. The black case indicates the stronger carbine cartridge. Equals cartridges made by Kynox Limited in Great Britain are marked with the word Kynoch and the caliber. Those made by Ely are marked E, Ely or Ely London. The author has samples marked in all three ways. Many of the cheaper foreign-made cartridges made for use in the pocket automatic pistols and sold in pawn shops have no marks at all on the head. And unfortunately, these are precisely the ones that the identification expert is most likely to encounter, for they are perhaps the most likely ones to be found. Occasionally, the bullet will be found to bear some initial or mark indicating which company manufactured it. The examples shown above were sketched from actual samples. Bullet marked W on side made by Winchester Repeating Arms Co. B. Base of -46 automatic pistol bullet, Remington make, showing letter stamped into lead core X-Ost at base. C. .45 automatic pistol bullet marked S on side, made by U. 8S. Cartridge Company session of cheap and ordinary criminals. However, even when there are no marks at all on the cartridge case, something is learned, for this fact at once tells the story that the cartridge was not one of the well-known American makes, and points a strong probability as to the origin of the purchase, that is, the pawn shop. Manufacturers' marks on bullets in the past. It has at times been the practice of certain ammunition makers to stamp a small initial or other mark at some inconspicuous place on the bullet. For example, at one time all-metal jacketed bullets of Winchester make had a small W stamped on the side of the jacket, just where the curve of the ogive starts, and bullets of the United States cartridge companies make had a small S in the same place. The practice of the various makers in this regard is liable to change at any time, and many companies who formerly used some such system no longer find it desirable or necessary, while others probably will in the future find it expedient to adopt something of the kind for a part or all of their production. Thus, experimental jots of bullets, special lots made for one purpose or another, bullets made up to be sold separately to reloaders instead of assembled into finished ammunition at the factory, and other bullets that differ from the ordinary production from any cause might be so marked. An easy way to put a special mark of this kind on the bullet is to engrave the desired character or symbol, which might consist of a circle, star, initial, etc., on the punch which is used to form the base of the bullet in the swaging or final shaping operation. In this case, the symbol will be imprinted on the base of the bullet. Such markings will often be found on the exposed lead at the base of a metal-cased bullet. TF the investigator does not realize that there may be such initials, EAT, and does not look specially for them. They will most likely pass unnoticed. If found, they are likely to be an important aid in determining the make or type of the bullet, and therefore any evidence bullet should be carefully examined for special markings, and their description and location should be recorded. Markings on the cartridge box when it is possible to locate the box containing the unused cartridges from which the suspected one came, it will often prove to be a fruitful source of information. The outside label on the box will give the caliber and type of the cartridge and invariably the manufacturer's name and address. Although this latter information may not be included in a few cases involving cheap cartridges of foreign origin or domestic cartridges intended to be smuggled out of the country in violation of the neutrality laws. The cartridge boxes of all legally sold ammunition will show the maker's name and address, and generally on the bottom of the box, or on the inside surface of the lid or flap will be found some odd numbers printed with a rubber stamp. These stampings are queer combinations such as 4EG2 or Li5ESF35 or 03CR and have no apparent meaning. However, they may prove of the utmost importance, and all such data should be carefully recorded, as they are the manufacturer's index of the exact lot number of this particular batch of ammunition. Each maker keeps a detailed record of each and every lot of ammunition be ever loaded. If the manufacturer is given this lot number correctly, he can supply any desired ballistic information relative to this particular lot of cartridges. Furthermore, it may be possible to obtain from the factory other cartridges of this particular lot of ammunition, as a supply is kept in storage for the purpose of making check tests in case any complaint is ever received relative to this lot of cartridges after they have gone out on the market. The store from which the suspected box of ammunition was purchased can often be definitely located by means of these lot numbers. The various ammunition companies are generally represented by one particular jobber or dealer for a certain locality, and often one particular make of cartridge can only be obtained from this one source. There are several essential instruments which must be on hand before any firearms identification of the advanced or laboratory type can be undertaken, and there are a number of others which may be regarded more or less as luxuries. That is, they are useful and they make the work easier, and in some cases they may determine the difference between success or failure, but they are not used or needed in every case, and therefore they are often omitted, from reasons of economy or necessity. The writer is acquainted with the equipment of several successful bullet identification laboratories, and he has noted a very wide variation in the number and kind of instruments provided. An attempt will be made in this place to give an idea of what is usually found, what is indispensable, and what is desirable but not absolutely necessary. For the convenience of the reader who is going to fit up such a laboratory, the trade names and present list prices of the apparatus is given whenever this information is available. In regard to measuring instruments, and also with MGST of the other apparatus, there are several makers and sources of supply. The author has made no effort to mention all the patterns and trade names, for the duplication involved would become tiresome. He has decided to give the trade name and price of the particular instrument that he himself happens to be using, because he is best acquainted with that material. In general, he does not thereby imply that some other make would not be just as good or even better. For example, several Starrett measuring instruments are mentioned. This is an excellent make, but another which has the very highest esteem among toolmakers is Brown and Sharp, and Goodell Pratt make excellent instruments of this kind. A most important part of the bullet identification laboratory, which, unfortunately for those aspiring to enter this field, cannot be purchased at all, is a very complete file of information regarding various firearms, cartridges, and their characteristics. Usually this is the work of one man who has made this subject his hobby for years, and has laboriously collected the required data over a long period of time. As an example of the extent of such an undertaking, it may be mentioned that the card index of bullet weights alone, collected by Lieutenant Fowler, firearms identification expert of the Metropolitan Police Force of Washington, contains over 3,200 cards. Another most important thing is a reference collection of arms and of cartridges. Live cartridges of every make and every caliber should be on hand, and the investigator should have sample-fired cartridges and bullets from each make and model of arm that is ever likely to be encountered in this work. Perhaps the most complete collection of this kind is the one gotten together by Colonel Goddard, whom the author believes to have more information on such subjects than any other one man in the world. In making this collection of fired cartridges and recovered bullets from known arms, the worker should bear in mind that it is well to have samples from at least 2 individual guns of each type, so that some idea can be gained of the differences to be expected between guns supposed to be the same. In like manner, he should have at least 2 recovered bullets and fired cases from each individual gun that is fired, so that he can see how much difference there is between different bullets from the same identical gun. There will always be some differences between the fatal bullet and the test bullet, even if they both came from the same weapon, and the inexperienced operator who did not know this would be badly misled. The character of the differences to be expected can only be known by a long and careful experience in examining known samples. As to actual instruments, the number really necessary is not large, but some of them are expensive. The author knows of one very successful laboratory which has the following equipment, which is just about the minimum that the investigator can get by with. Bullet comparison microscope with lamps and camera. 48mm and 72mm lenses for direct photography. 5x7 Eastman view camera with lens and shutter. Crown tripod. Adapters for holding the 48mm and 72mm lenses in Eastman camera. Fully equipped dark room for photographic developing and printing. Focusing glass for camera. Bullet scales. Micrometer calipers. Magnet. Bullet recovery box. The author of this book has the following material on hand for this kind of work. Bullet comparison microscope with lamps and equipment. Microtessor lenses for direct photography. 2 cameras with shutters and various lenses, exposure meters, etc. Crown tripod with tilting top. 2 other tripods, attachment for holding camera for vertical photography, etc. Bosch and Lohm focusing magnifier for camera. Bullet scales. Micrometer calipers, Brown and Sharp number 15 RS. Caliper square, 6-inch, Brown and Sharp, number 560. Flexible steel scale, 3-inch, Starretts number 321. Taper gauge, Starretts number 269A. Magnet, bullet recovery box. Prism for photographing breech face of revolver. Barrel reflector. Barrel telescope. Reading glass. Aplanatic pocket magnifier. B and L7 14 power. 3 watchmakers magnifying glasses, different focal lengths. Magnifying glass on stand. Binocular microscope, Greeno wide field type, Spencer make, with assorted paired objectives and oculars. 2 laboratory microscopes with assorted objectives and oculars giving from 12 to 1500 diameters magnification. Filar micrometer eyepiece for microscope. Stage micrometer for use with filar micrometer. Miscellaneous attachments and materials. In planning for the purchase of firearms identification equipment or instruments, the kind of work which it is intended to enter should be taken into consideration. All endeavor of this kind may be divided into 3 classes, each of which requires a somewhat different equipment from the other 2. To be considered first as requiring the simplest equipment is what may be called preliminary firearms investigation. This is simply the application of keen observation, good common sense, and a profound knowledge of firearms and ammunition and how they work to the clarification of problems connected with cases in which shooting is a factor. This is the kind of work that can be done by the average gun crank, or the man who has made a study of firearms his hobby. 9 times out of 10, few, if any, instruments are needed, and these few are usually the ones that would be in the possession of a firearms enthusiast in any event. The second class of work is that which involves the identification of a fired cartridge or bullet as having come from a particular individual gun. This work involves a considerable degree of laboratory training and experience, and a familiarity with scientific methods and instruments, particularly with microscopy and photography. In this book, work of this kind is called Advanced Firearms Identification. It requires a complete comparison microscope and photomicrographic camera, with several accessories, as will be described in detail below, together with a fully equipped photographic darkroom. The third and last class of work considered in this connection is the research work which is being done by those leaders in this field, such as Colonel Goddard, who not only practice advanced firearms identification, but who also are engaged in broadening and developing this science, and who are equipped to handle the most difficult and abstruse cases. Such a research worker will need several complicated and expensive instruments which would seldom, if ever, be used by the routine worker. With this explanation out of our way, we will now proceed to describe in some considerable detail the various instruments needed by all three of these classes of workers. The instruments and apparatus needed are very few and are inexpensive. The following list includes the necessary ones, with a brief description of their use. Magnifying glass: a small hand magnifier, of the kind that can be purchased at any optical store for about $1 or more, is indispensable. It is used for examining bullets, cartridge cases, and guns for markings, serial numbers, etc. Bosch and Lohm folding pocket magnifier number 56 with a lens 25 mm in diameter and a magnifying power of 4, which retails for $1, is very satisfactory. The triple aplanatic magnifier, catalog number 168, giving a magnification of _Z.5 times, and listing for $2.50, is a high-grade glass. Sometimes a watchmaker's glass or loupe will be found even more convenient than the hand magnifier described, as it can be held in the eye, thus leaving both hands free. The most suitable is Bosch and Lohm number 144 LP, which has a detachable spring to pass around the head and thus hold the glass in place. It lists for $1.40. Micrometer calipers: it is indispensable to have available a good micrometer caliper, with which the diameter of bullets may be read in thousandths of an inch. These instruments come in various sizes. The most suitable is the 1-inch size, which will cost about $10. Many people who have never used a micrometer caliper will get false readings with this instrument, because, as with any other precision instrument, a certain amount of skill is necessary to use it correctly. Any machinist or toolmaker can show you how to use a micrometer caliper correctly in a few minutes. The principal thing to guard against is the tendency of the uninstructed to turn the handle too hard. The instrument has a plunger which is threaded with a fine screw of 40 threads to the inch, so that each revolution of the handle advances the plunger 25 thousandths of an inch. This fine screw affords a tremendous leverage, so that if force is applied in turning it, almost any reading at all may be obtained, as the micrometer will simply crush down the object as the screw is turned. In turning down the handle, care must be used to employ a delicate touch, and to stop as soon as the plunger is in contact with the object to be measured. Uniformity of force applied is necessary if consecutive readings are to be comparative. It will not do to turn the handle hard one time and easy the next, else the results will differ every time, depending on the force applied rather than the size of the object. A very convenient attachment to the micrometer, which minimizes the variations in force likely to be used by those who are not skilled in the use of this instrument, is the ratchet stop. This is a small supplementary handle, connected to the main handle by a spring ratchet, so arranged that only a certain predetermined amount of force, according to the tension of the ratchet spring, can be transmitted to the main handle when this supplementary handle is turned. By using only this ratchet to some of the tools found useful in preliminary bullet identification. Top, left, Bosch and Lohm aplanatic magnifier, 7.5 power. Next, watchmaker's glass fitted to sling over the lens of a pair of spectacles. Middle of picture, Bosch and Lohm focusing magnifier, for use in getting the image sharply focused. The ground glass on the right, Bosch and Lohm watchmaker's glass, 8-inch focus with removable spring for holding it in the eye. The spring goes around the back of the head. Left, a similar glass with spring removed. Bottom left, vernier calipers, useful for measuring the overall length of cartridges, etc. Right, 1-inch micrometer calipers and star at 3-inch flexible steel toolie number 321. Turn the handle with the trouble above mentioned, of getting variable readings on account of a variation in the twisting force applied to the handle is avoided. Micrometers can be purchased with or without the ratchet stop, which costs about 50 cents additional. Starrett's micrometer caliper number 3, listing at $10, has this attachment. A somewhat less expensive one, which is very satisfactory, and which ISO has the ratchet when so ordered, is number 436, listing at $6.75 with ratchet or $6.25 without it. The points of the ordinary micrometer caliper are too thick to go into the grooves left on the bullet by the rifling, and if it is desired to compare the diameter of the grooves in an evidence bullet with those on a test bullet, the readings cannot be taken with the ordinary micrometer. It is an advantage to have the points with a good wide bearing, especially when measuring soft materials such as lead bullets, because fine points would have a tendency to sink into the surface easily under the force of the screw, and thus make the readings uncertain. Moreover, they have a tendency to mar the evidence bullet. However, as a difference in the diameter of the evidence bullet and the test bullet shows conclusively that they did not come from the same gun, it may at times be an advantage to be able to measure the diameter of the grooves in the bullet, corresponding to the bore or land diameter of the gun. This is perhaps more important to the preliminary investigator, or the one who does not use the comparison microscope, than it is to the man who does. The man with the comparison microscope available will simply put the bullets under the scope at once, and will find in this way that they do or do not match, while the man with no comparison microscope available will have to find some other way to prove this, or at least to do the preliminary work of finding out perhaps that the diameter is the same, and that further work must be done with the microscope by someone who has one. The author finds that very few experts on identification equip themselves to measure diameters of the grooves left by the lands on the fired bullet. The simplest way to make such a measurement with a reasonable degree of accuracy is with a micrometer caliper which has narrow points. Such an instrument is the so-called micrometer screw thread comparator, made by Starrett, catalog number 210, listing at $7. This is simply a micrometer caliper with the points tapered to a diameter of about 1/64 of an inch, and reading 0 when they are together. The author fully realizes that when some of his readers who know something about measuring tools see this, they will think that he is talking about the screw thread micrometer, which has a point on one anvil and a groove on the other, and is not suitable for measuring anything else except the diameter of a screw. The author does not mean a screw thread micrometer, which correctly measures the pitch diameter of the screw, and will measure nothing else. He is referring to a simple micrometer which has the anvils tapered to a point, and which is sometimes used for the specific purpose of measuring the diameters of screws, though it does this incorrectly, and is only useful on screws for comparisons. It is, however, a perfectly good and accurate caliper for straight measurements, with points small enough to go into the grooves left on a bullet, and at the small price charged for it, is well worth a place in the kit of every firearms man, though it must be frankly stated that very few seem to use it for this purpose. Very likely most firearms experts never even heard of it, but it is a good instrument. Reading a micrometer caliper as stated above, the screw on the micrometer caliper has 40 threads per inch, and therefore advances 25 thousandths of an inch for each turn. The barrel of the micrometer has a horizontal mark corresponding to each turn, and there are 40 of these marks on the barrel of the 1-inch micrometer, with every fourth one made longer, and the long ones numbered 1, 2, 3, etc. up to 10. These are tenths of an inch, and the short divisions are each 25 thousandths. The thimble of the micrometer, the part that turns, has 25 vertical lines on its beveled edge, and each one of these lines represents 1/1000th of an inch. To read the instrument, count up the total number of horizontal lines that show below the edge of the thimble, and multiply this number by 25. Then add the number of small vertical lines on the thimble from 0 around to the vertical line on the barrel where the horizontal graduations are. For example, 3 horizontal lines show below the thimble, and the 5th line from 0 on the thimble is at the vertical index line on the barrel. This is a reading of 80 thousandths of an inch. The process of counting up the horizontal lines showing below the thimble is facilitated by the fact that every 4th line is numbered to indicate tenths of an inch. Suppose, for example, that we are measuring a .45 caliber pistol bullet. We find that there are 18 horizontal lines below the thimble, but we do not actually count the whole 18 of them. Instead, we first see that the longer horizontal line with the number 4 is the last long one visible, so we have 4/10ths of an inch to start with, and we simply count the remaining short lines between this and the thimble, which will be 2. This is 50 thousandths, so we have .450, and we must add the reading of the thimble itself, which in this case will perhaps be 2, so we have the complete diameter as .452 inch. Care must be used in reading a micrometer caliper. Even experienced machinists, who read these instruments every day, sometimes make a mistake of 1 division, or 25 thousandths, by looking at the instrument hurriedly or carelessly. Bullet and powder scales. It is absolutely necessary to have available a scale or balance with which to weigh bullets, for the weight is an important part of the identification of any recovered bullet. Most recovered bullets are the same weight as when they were fired, though if a high-velocity lead bullet, or even a jacketed bullet strikes a heavy bone, it may have pieces torn off of it. If there is any doubt whether or not all the original weight is in the recovered bullet, an X-ray of the wound will show any remaining lead as black irregular splotches. Generally, however, a visual examination will show whether the bullet has actually had particles torn off, or is merely smashed or knocked lopsided by contact with the bone. For weighing recovered bullets, etc., a sensitive scale weighing to within 1/4 of a grain is necessary. An inexpensive scale that is accurate to more than the required degree is the Pacific Bullet and Powder Scale, made by the IFIC Gun Sight Company, 355 HT, San Francisco, California. It _retage complete with weights. A scale of higher grade is the Volland Pulp Balance, catalog number 1053, made by Volland & Sons of New Rochelle, NY. They sell for $22 without cabinet, or $34 in a mahogany-framed glass cabinet with sliding front. An instrument of this precision should be protected from dust, and I would recommend that the scale with the cabinet be purchased. Graduated steel for various miscellaneous measurements where extreme accuracy is not required. A steel rule graduated in hundredths of an inch is very satisfactory for use with the hand magnifier. Starrett's Ibel steel rule number 321 exactly fills the bill. A taper G for quickly determining the diameter of the bore of a rifle or pistol. It is convenient to have on hand Starrett's taper gauge, number 269A, costing $5.50. This has a number of blades, tapering in width and graduated from 1/8 of an inch to inch by thousandths. This instrument is chiefly useful for giving a quick idea as to the caliber of a gun. Simply insert the appropriate blade into the muzzle of the gun and read the diameter at the muzzle. By drawing the 2 parts of the telefire apart or pushing them together, the focus may be adjusted for any desired part of the inside of the barrel, and by slanting the instrument to one side or the other, as shown in the lower sketch, the sides of the bore may be brought into view as desired. That the bullet is of foreign manufacture, as steel jackets are not used in American manufacturing practice. Barrel telescope. It is often necessary to make a visual inspection of the inside of a gun or pistol barrel to see, for example, whether or not it shows signs of having been fired recently, to look for leading or metal fouling, to see how distinct the lands and grooves appear, how much wear or erosion appears, or for many other purposes. The portion of the bore near the muzzle can be seen fairly well with the naked eye, but the parts that are farther away can naturally be seen less clearly. In order to overcome this difficulty, the author thought to utilize a short focus telescope or a long focus magnifier, which is about the same thing, so he obtained a couple of lenses and fitted them up for this purpose, and made a very successful barrel telescope, which could be adjusted so as to focus on any part of the bore desired. Recently, a pocket telescope has appeared on the market which will save the reader the trouble of figuring out such a combination for himself, for it can very well be used for the construction of an excellent barrel examining telescope. This is the Telefire, sold by Bosch and Lohm for $3.75. It is a small pocket telescope magnifier which is indeed a wonderful value for the price, and a most useful instrument to have, aside from the special use to be described. It has 2 lenses in a sliding mount, and when they are together, they form a telescope. But when they are separated by simply pulling them apart, the front lens forms an excellent magnifier with a power of 6x. When the instrument is used as a telescope, it can be focused for any distance from infinity to 8 inches by simply separating the 2 lenses or pushing them together in their sliding mount. This little device is just a little over an inch long and 7 of an inch in diameter. Comes complete in a small leather case. The fact that as a telescope it can be focused for very short distances is what makes it useful for a barrel examining telescope. To adapt it to this use, the author simply cut off a piece 8 inches long from a brass tube 34-inch in outside diameter. This fits snugly into the front flange of the little telescope. To look at a gun barrel, the far end of this tube is slipped over the end of the gun barrel and comes to rest against the base of the front sight. The telescope can then be focused for any desired portion of the barrel by simply pulling the eye lens out or pushing it in. By tipping the instrument one way or the other, using the front sight as a fulcrum, various sides of the bore can be brought plainly into view. Ullet CC box for either elementary or advanced firearms identification. It frequently becomes desirable or necessary to obtain a bullet which is known to have been fired from a given weapon. For example, a bullet is found at the scene of the crime and a suspect is found to own a weapon of the same caliber. Obviously, one of the first things to do, even in elementary investigation, is to determine whether or not the fatal bullet could have come from the weapon in question. This task is greatly facilitated by having a sample bullet known to have been fired from the suspected gun. Then the two can be compared, and it can easily be told whether or not the marks left by the lands and grooves are of about the same width, whether the number of grooves is the same or diff itself into a tight ball of cotton which it carries along with it. This ball of cotton being dragged through the mass of waste acts as a brake which gradually brings the bullet to rest in a short space. Such a box is best constructed of 4 boards from 8 to 10 inches wide and 4 feet long, 3 of which are nailed together to form a trough with the top left open. The 4th board is simply laid on top. The front end of the trough is left open, while a square plank is nailed over the far end so as to close it. To use this box, it should be placed in such a position that if a bullet should by accident go all the way through, it will do no harm. For example, the box might be set on a bench in the basement with the end against the brick wall. Then, standing 6 or 8 feet away from the box, the user fires a shot into the center of the box so that the bullet will strike the exposed cotton waste about in the center and so that its path will be parallel to the sides of the box. If the aim is poor and the direction is bad so that the bullet goes through the waste on an angle, it will strike either the sides, bottom, or top. But as the angle at which it strikes any of these interior surfaces will be slight, it will be deflected back into the mass of cotton. Naturally, it is highly desirable to avoid having the bullet strike any of the boards as described above, for this would deform the bullet somewhat, which is undesirable. In fact, unless the box is to be used in some safe place such as a closed basement, and only by expert shots, it is a desirable precaution to sheath the box with metal. After the shot is fired, the location of the bullet in the cotton can be determined by feeling through until a lump is discovered. Locating the bullets in the cotton is facilitated if several vertical partitions of cardboard are inserted in the cotton so as to divide it into sections. By lifting these pieces of cardboard out after firing, it can be determined approximately how far the cardboard has gone, and the bullet can be more easily located. Always place the box in such a location that safety will be assured if a bullet should pierce one of the sides or should escape under the cover. I have never had this happen, but one can never be too careful. The advanced worker should of course have all the tools and instruments that have been described already, and in addition he should have several other pieces of apparatus, some of which are highly complicated and very expensive and most of which require a considerable degree of scientific training and experience for their use. These are listed below. Microscopes. It is desirable to have not only one microscope but several. In addition to the ordinary microscope, which is used merely for looking at magnified objects, a special form of this instrument called the comparison microscope is indispensable for bullet identification, and in addition there are several attachments to the microscope which must be on hand. These will be described in turn. A compound microscope always has 2 sets of lenses, one of which screws on to the bottom part of the microscope tube near the object to be viewed, and is called the objective lens or objective. The other is called the eyepiece or ocular, and fits into the top of the microscope tube nearest to the eye of the observer. Objective lenses are listed in the catalog by the equivalent focus in millimeters or by the magnifying power. All modern objectives are marked plainly with the magnifying power. Modern oculars are listed in the catalog by the magnification and are so marked. The final magnification of the instrument is found by multiplying together the magnifying power marked on the ocular and that marked on the objective. Thus, a 10-power ocular, when used with a 48mm objective, having a magnifying power of 22, will give an overat magnification of 22. The body of the OS consists of a draw tube arranged to hold the objective on the bottom and the ocular in the top. The tube is arranged to pull out like a telescope, and there is a series of numbers engraved on the inside sliding tube to indicate the tube length. Modern objectives are corrected to give the best image with a tube length of 160mm, and the microscope should always be set to this length when using it. It should be noted that the magnification marked on the lenses is for this tube length only, as a longer tube length increases the magnification and a shorter one diminishes it, the stage under the body of the microscope, there is a platform for the object to rest on. This is called the stage. Some stages have a movable holder for the object, and this holder has two motions, one backwards and forwards, and the other from side to side. The motions are made with the aid of a rack and pinion arrangement, with knobs to turn. This device is called the mechanical stage, and by its means, very small motions of the object can be made with precision. This is important, because with the magnification accomplished by the microscope magnifies the motion of the object as well as the object itself, and very small motions of the hand seem large when viewed through the instrument. For this reason, often very minute motions of the object are required to bring it to the required new position, and by means of the mechanical stage, this motion may be accomplished with precision, as the motion of the adjusting knobs is reduced through the action of the rack and pinion. The slides of the mechanical stage usually have graduations on them, marked in millimeters, with a vernier reading to 1/10 of a millimeter, or 4/1000 of an inch. The reason for these graduations is to enable a given object, for example, in a preparation on a glass slide, to be noted for future examination by having its location noted in readings of the stage graduations. However, it is very useful in bullet work for making measurements of such things as the length of bullets or cartridge cases, etc., using an eyepiece with a crosshair in it. For this reason, the stage of the comparison microscope should have the graduations on them. Magnification. The ordinary microscope, as found in most laboratories, magnifies from about 15 diameters up to about 1,500 or more. Most people who are inexperienced in the use of these instruments think that the higher is the power, the more the user can see. This idea is entirely erroneous. The power which is most effective depends very largely on the subject under observation and what it is desired to observe. The higher the power, the closer must be the lens to the object under observation, and the smaller will be the field of view. Thus, with high-powered lenses, the outline of the object is lost and only the smallest portion of the surface is seen. Moreover, only that portion of the surface can be seen which happens to be at that distance from the object lens which is correct to bring it into focus, for with high-powered lenses the depth of focus is small and only an extremely small motion of the lens will throw the object out of focus and make it disappear. In other words, the depth of focus varies with the power, becoming smaller as the power increases. And with even moderately high powers there is such small depth of focus that if there are depressions or irregularities in the surface, only the tops of the ridges or the bottoms of the depressions will be seen, depending on whether the instrument is focused on the tops or on the bottoms of the irregularities. However, as the power becomes lower, a greater depth can be seen, so that with a moderate power, both the tops and bottoms of the depressions can be seen at one time. Another disadvantage of the higher powers is the fact that it is difficult to light an object that must be placed only a few thousandths of an inch away. For this reason, powers higher than about 100 diameters are used mostly for the examination of transparent objects mounted on glass slides, in which case the illumination is accomplished by throwing the light up through the glass by means of a mirror or condenser under the stage of the instrument. On very flat surfaces, such as a polished metal specimen, the illumination with the high powers may be accomplished by means of a special device, called a vertical illuminator, which throws a beam of light down through the objective itself. However, the bullet is neither transparent nor flat, and even if the bullet could be illuminated for examination under the high powers, it would be useless for Kerr purposes, as all that would be seen would be a very small portion of the surface very highly magnified, with nothing to compare it with. Wide-field binocular microscope. The ordinary microscope inverts the image of the object, and this is often confusing. There is, however, a type of prismatic binocular microscope which shows objects right side up and, moreover, has two eyepieces and objectives, so that objects under examination are seen with stereoscopic vision and in true perspective. This is the Greenough-type binocular microscope. It is best adapted to low-power work, and the objectives and eyepieces usually furnished with such an outfit will allow the use of powers from 6 diameters to 84 diameters, though higher or lower powers can be had if desired. An excellent instrument of this type is the Spencer Wide-Field Universal Binocular Microscope No. 55 LT. This is fitted with 3 objective lenses, giving magnifications of 1.0, 1.7, and 2.3 diameters, respectively, and with 3 pairs of eyepieces of 6, 12.5, and 17 power. The magnifications thus made available are 6, 10.2, 12.5, 13.8, 17, 21.2, 28.6, 28.9, and 39.1 diameters. Such a microscope is one of the most convenient instruments that it is possible to have around an identification bureau. It is useful for 1001 purposes, such as viewing powders, ink marks, handwriting, dust, or any small objects whatever that may have wide-field binocular microscope, which is extremely useful for the examination of bullets, powders, cartridge cases, handwriting, etc. This instrument not only allows the use of both eyes, but it gives a stereoscopic effect which enables the depth of depressions and scratches to be seen, and gives specimens under examination a very pleasing appearance of reality, which is of great assistance in judging what is seen, been collected in connection with the investigation, etc. It has the great advantage that the comparatively low power and the binocular stereoscopic vision allow things to be seen with a natural appearance so that they can be recognized. They appear merely as natural objects very much enlarged, instead of looking like an entirely unfamiliar picture, as do the things seen through a high-powered single-tube microscope of the laboratory type. The author has for years done microscopy of all kinds, and has available microscopes of various kinds, ranging in power from 6 to 1500 diameters, all of which have been used on occasion, but he has no hesitation in saying that for general use the wide-field prismatic binocular is far and away the most useful. This is particularly true where the user has not had extensive laboratory training and experience in the use of microscopes. With any such outfit, it is absolutely necessary to have some dependable and uniform source of illumination. A small lamp specially made for this use is the Bosch and Lohm Universal Microscope Lamp, catalog number 1808, which at the present writing lists for $3.50. A much more satisfactory lamp is Spencer Microscope Lamp number 3/0, costing $25. Or a similar lamp made by Bosch and Lohm. This lamp has an iris diaphragm of its own for controlling the intensity of the illumination. It is part of the standard comparison microscope outfit, and therefore will not have to be purchased separately for use with the wide-field binocular if a comparison microscope is to be obtained also. Comparison microscope. This instrument is used in firearms investigations to determine definitely whether a bullet or cartridge case connected with a shooting affair was or was not fired from a particular individual gun. To make this determination, the expert compares the evidence bullet or the evidence cartridge case with a similar bullet or cartridge case fired in the suspected gun, called the test bullet or cartridge case. Test bullets are obtained by firing them into cotton waste in the bullet recovery box already described. The object of the comparison microscope is to determine whether or not both evidence cartridge case and test cartridge case have exactly the same markings impressed on them by their impact against the breech face of the arm, or if both bullets have exactly the same scratches and marks on them from their passage over the irregularities in the barrel of the gun. With a fatal bullet and a test bullet at hand, the investigator makes use of the comparison microscope, which is nothing more than two laboratory-type microscopes, mounted on a stand side by side, and fitted with a special comparison eyepiece. This comparison eyepiece is a sort of bridge which fits onto the eyepieces of both microscopes and extends across the space between them. In the middle, it has a single eyepiece of its own. By a system of lenses and prisms, the comparison eyepiece takes half the image from the right-hand microscope and the other half from the left-hand microscope and combines them in the one eyepiece of its own. Thus, if the two bullets are mounted under the objectives of the two microscopes forming the instrument, the operator, looking into the single eyepiece in the middle of the bridge, sees what appears to be one bullet, but it is made up of half of the image of the right-hand bullet and half of the image of the left-hand bullet. Thus, the operator is enabled to see the two bullets side by side, or rather, to apparently see the two bullets sliced in two and the cut parts placed together. This enables an extremely critical comparison to be made, and differences in the width and shape of the lands and grooves, etc., are readily apparent. It should be particularly noted that the comparison eyepiece used with the bullet identification outfit contains prisms which bring the image right side up again after it has been inverted by the two microscopes. One thing that often confuses the beginner in microscopy is the fact that the ordinary microscope shows everything upside down and backwards. Every motion of the object under the lens in making adjustments must thus be reversed, which is difficult for the beginner. Moreover, there would be some chance of confusing the test bullet with the fatal bullet. Fortunately, the comparison eyepiece removes all this confusion and enables the user of the bullet identification to see everything right side up and in its proper position, and also makes the motion of the image follow that of the bullet when adjustments are being made. It should be understood that while the comparison eyepiece brings the two images together into one, the two halves are separated by a fine division line, which is very necessary for several reasons. In the first place, it shows definitely where one image leaves off and the other begins. Then, 2, in photographs that are to be submitted for evidence, it clearly indicates that there are 2 separate images involved, and adds an atmosphere of straightforwardness that will have a tendency to remove any suspicion on the part of the jury that an attempt is being made to make things look too perfect. This instrument fits over the eyepieces of 2 ordinary microscopes and brings half the image from each instrument to the central eyepiece, where the 2 halves are seen side by side, so that a searching comparison is possible. A matched photograph are 2 perfectly blended. The comparison eyepiece is equipped with a focusing collar that permits a sharp focus on this dividing line, and this matter of focusing the line sharply should not be neglected. This should be done before the final focusing on the object is accomplished. As there are 2 separate microscopes, with the comparison eyepiece lying like a bridge from one to the other, it is rather inconvenient to focus the individual microscopes separately by raising or lowering the body of the instrument, as is commonly done when using a microscope alone. For the motion of raising either microscope separately will raise that end of the comparison eyepiece also, and this motion of raising one end of it without raising the other will tip it and throw it out of level. For that reason, the most elaborate comparison microscopes are arranged so that when the 2 microscopes are once adjusted to bring the comparison bridge level, they may be left that way, and the focusing may be accomplished by raising or lowering the stages, which are provided with a vertical adjustment by means of a focusing knob. The best magnification for bullet or cartridge work under the comparison microscope is from 12 to 25 diameters, and the ordinary equipment of the instruments furnished by the Spencer Lens Company includes a pair of matched objectives of 48 mm focal length, giving an initial magnification of 2.2 diameters, and 2 matched pairs of eyepieces, one of 6 and the other of 10 power, thus giving a total magnification of either 13.2 or 22 diameters. The lower figure is more suitable for visual examination, and the higher for photography. There are usually some slight differences between any 2 objectives or eyepieces, even if they are marked the same, and it is essential that the 2 images should be magnified exactly the same. It is usual to have the 2 objectives and the 2 eyepieces matched by the maker. In other words, he picks out of his stock, by means of tests that he has available, 2 objectives that are identical in every way, and that give exactly the same magnification, and he does the same for the eyepieces. It is useful to know that the U.S. Bureau of Standards at Washington will examine lenses intended for this purpose which are submitted to them and will give a certificate that they are properly matched. This is often useful as tending to help establish the fact that the instruments used can be relied on to give authoritative results. In making comparisons, the operator must be careful to have both microscopes adjusted the same. A failure to do this may result in different magnifications being given by the 2 instruments and will nullify the most careful matching of lenses. Each microscope has a draw tube graduated in millimeters, and a tube length of 160 millimeters is necessary to give the magnification marked on the lenses. The draw tubes should be kept adjusted to this length at all times. Moreover, the body of each instrument should be raised to precisely the same height above the stage, and left there. In this way, both eyepieces on which the comparison ocular rests will be at the same height, and the bridge will be level. It is well to make a mark on the sliding part of the frame to indicate this proper height. Bullet holder under the objective lens of each microscope is the bullet holder. As already mentioned, there are 2 kinds of stage in common use, the plain stage, which is just an ordinary platform, and the mechanical stage, which is the same platform fitted with a sliding part on top arranged to be moved by means of 2 racks and pinions, one of which gives motion to one side or the other, and the other of which gives motion forward and backward. The motion in each direction is controlled by a knob with a knurled head, and by using this knob, extremely delicate motions or changes in position of the object can be made with precision. The ordinary mechanical stage is intended for use with glass slides and is fitted to hold them, but on the comparison microscope used in ballistic work, the case is different, as the object to be handled is the bullet or the shell, and moreover, the bullet must be held so that it can be turned so as to bring every part under examination. For this use, the Spencer Lens Company have designed special mechanical stages with bullet holders mounted on them. The bullet holder consists essentially of a spindle with a detachable cylindrical head to it, which is about the same diameter as the bullet to be tested. To accommodate the various sizes of bullet, the Spencer outfits have 4 sizes of holders, one size being for .22 caliber bullets, and the others for .32, .38, and .45 calibers, respectively. Bullets of other calibers will be close enough to one of these four sizes to be accommodated satisfactorily by the set of holders nearest to the bullet in diameter. These holders are furnished in pairs, one for use under each side of the comparison microscope, and there are two sets in each size, one set being arranged for use with bullets having the marks of 6-grooved rifling, and the other for bullets having 5 grooves. The holders have index lines engraved on the outer surface to correspond to the position of the grooves on the surface of the bullet, and these index marks are numbered from 1 to 5 or from 1 to 6, so that each land or groove of the bullet on that holder is identified by a number, as long as the bullet remains in the same position on the holder. There are also 2 sets of numbered drums furnished to slip on the spindles near the handles that are used for turning them, and these are also numbered, one set for 5-grooved bullets and the other for 6-grooved ones. The bullets are held onto the spindles by the simple procedure of sticking them on with some plastic or adhesive substance. Ordinary modeler's clay is sold under various trade names, such as plasticine, plastique, plastine, etc., is used for this purpose. This material is a clay in which cocoa butter is used as a solvent or mixer in order to prevent the material from hardening. As cocoa butter will not dissolve, the clay never hardens. It is quite corrosive on either bullets or brass cartridge cases and should be wiped off after the examination is all completed. It is useful to know that any cleaning fluid, such as is sold for taking grease spots from garments, will dissolve cocoa butter, and therefore can be used to remove the last traces of modeling clay from bullets, bullet holders, or any other objects or instruments on which it may have become smeared. In preparing for an examination, the fatal bullet is stuck onto one spindle and the test bullet onto the other, with a raised portion corresponding to a groove of the rifling on each bullet matched to the index marks described above. Naturally, the number of lands and grooves on the bullets must be counted, and the proper spindle with either 5 or 6 groove markings, as the case may be, must be selected. After the bullets have been suitably illuminated and the instrument has been focused, the knobs of the mechanical stage are turned until the bullets are properly in the field of view and lined up with each other so that half of the picture is composed of one bullet and half is composed of the other. Then, starting with number 1 groove on each bullet, that one is held still and the other one is turned, trying all the time to find a position where every marking on one seems to be continued on the other. When this point is reached, the bullet which is being turned is grasped with the fingers and held firmly in place, and the spindle is turned until number 1 mark is indexed with the groove that is uppermost. We now have number 1 groove of both the test and the fatal bullets matched up. Next, the bullets are both rotated together until number 2 groove on each bullet is uppermost. In this position, all marks should again match, and so all the way round. Here is where the utility of the numbered drums comes in. Often it will be desired to demonstrate that the bullets match at various places, but an attitude of suspicion may frequently be encountered. The observer may readily agree that the bullets match when first viewed, but after they are turned, he may refuse to believe that the expert really moved them. Such an attitude is prevented by first pointing to the drum and stating that the groove number 1 will be examined. After a match is admit, the operator will then state that groove number 2 will next be examined, and he then turns both drums until the numeral 2 is uppermost. Again, the lines will match. He can proceed in the same way to number 3, 4, etc., and all doubt that he really moved the bullets will be prevented. It frequently is necessary or desirable to examine cartridge cases with the comparison microscope. The parts most suitable one form of holder for holding an empty shell under the comparison microscope for examination. Another type is simply an iris diaphragm, which is arranged to grasp the ease under the rim or in the extractor groove. For comparison are the heads of the cartridges and the primers, and for such an examination the cartridges are held with the flat surface of the heads uppermost. Sometimes the cases are mounted on little cones, but this method is often troublesome, as most likely the cartridges will be found to be bent out of shape at the mouth, either by the action of the automatic pistol in the operation of ejection, or from some accident, such as being stepped on. However, the head of the cartridge is strong and thick, and not much subject to distortion through any such cause, so that the most practical holder is one that will grasp the case just under the rim, if it is a rim case, or in the groove around the head if it is a rimless or semi-rim case. Someone finally thought of the simple but effective expedient of using an iris diaphragm, such as TS used on cameras and microscopes. The diaphragm can be opened large enough to admit the head of the case, and then closed in to fit under the rim or into the groove. Holders made on this principle are furnished by the Spencer Lens Company with their outfits for bullet identification. In examining cartridge cases under the comparison microscope, we are dealing usually with a bright metal surface which reflects light very efficiently, and with the same amount of illumination that is used for bullet examination, all detail will often be lost in a glare of light. To control this condition, the comparison microscope should have iris diaphragms fitted just above the objective lenses. By partially closing these diaphragms, the detail can often be brought out in a remarkable manner. Moreover, when the diaphragm is partly closed, the depth of focus is increased and the image sharpened up. The illumination of the bullet or other object is most important. Each microscope must have its own light, for bullets oxidize differently, and it is not uncommon to find the fatal bullet considerably darker in color than the test. By adjusting the intensity of the individual lamps to suit the color of each bullet, the AP parents of the bullets as to brightness can be matched up, and this helps a lot in making comparisons as well as in photographing. Some experts consider it desirable to lighten up the fatal bullet by dropping it in ammonia for a few minutes, but others prefer not to do this for fear it might be considered as changing the evidence, though such a contention seems very far-fetched, as the ammonia does not change the bullet in any way except to restore its original color, which is continually becoming darker with the passage of time. The earlier Spencer comparison microscopes have individual lamps, Spencer number 358, mounted on the edge of each stage, but the later ones are regularly equipped with two separate lamps of a much preferable kind, known as Spencer microscope lamp number 370, which are not clamped onto the edge of the microscope stage, but have separate stands of their own. They have blue glass and ground glass for diffusing the illumination, and iris diaphragms for controlling the intensity of the light. They can be used for other things besides illumination of the objects under the microscope, as for example, the lighting of bullets being photographed by the camera and short focus lens, as will be described below. The proper adjustment of the lamps will have a most important effect on the definition obtained. Usually it is advantageous to employ very oblique illumination, and sometimes the rays will have to be directed almost parallel to the surface in examining the heads of cartridge cases, etc. The operator should experiment with this subject, as the best results cannot be obtained in any other way. Photomicrographic camera with the comparison microscope. The investigator may or may not find that the fatal bullet matches the test bullet. If it does, he has visual proof of it, but this proof will no longer be available after he takes the bullet out from under the lens, unless he takes the precaution to photograph what he has seen through the microscope. This matter of photographing through a microscope is common laboratory practice, and is called photomicrography. All that it requires in addition to the apparatus that we have already described is a camera with a holder to retain it in a vertical position over the eyepiece of the microscope, or if a comparison microscope is being used, over the eyepiece of the comparator. When a camera is used in this manner for photographing through a microscope, the camera lens is removed, for in this case the objective and the eyepiece of the microscope take the place of the camera lens. With any microscope, an image of the object viewed can be projected onto any white surface such as, for example, the ceiling over the microscope. Of course, in such a case as this, where an image is projected onto a screen, a very strong illumination of the object under the microscope must be used, and this would be rather hard to do satisfactorily in the case of dull-colored objects such as bullets. But the image projected onto the plate of the camera is plenty bright enough to photograph when even moderate illuminations are used, because if the illumination is dull, a longer exposure can be given to compensate for the lack of brilliance in the picture. Thus, photography can be accomplished when the projected image is not brightly enough illuminated to be satisfactory for visual examination. All microscope makers such as the Bosch and Lohm Optical Company, the Spencer Lens Company, and others make cameras specially mounted for use with the microscope. These cameras are mounted on a vertical post attached to a base plate for holding the microscope. The camera is mounted in a vertical position and is so arranged that it can be placed directly over the microscope or can be swung to one side to allow the microscope to be focused by eye. In addition, some cameras furnished for this purpose have an eyepiece of their own sticking out at right angles from the shutter housing so that the image in the microscope can be viewed by eye without removing the camera from its position over the microscope. In order to take a picture through the microscope, it is only necessary to set up the object under the microscope, adjust the illumination, and then focus the instrument until the field of view and the appearance of the object are satisfactory. Then the camera is swung over the microscope and the shutter is opened. An image will now be projected onto the ground glass plate in the back of the camera, and this image may be viewed by looking at the ground glass plate the same as is done in taking an ordinary photograph. Usually the image will be very dim, and it will be necessary for the operator to place a black cloth over his head in order to shut out extraneous light and render the subject clearly visible. The object should then be brought into sharp focus by moving the stage of the microscope up or down. It is very useful indeed to have at hand a focusing magnifier, which is merely a small magnifying glass in a metal tube which is of the right length to bring the ground glass into focus when the tube is set on top of the ground glass plate. Such a focusing magnifier is furnished by the Bosch & Lomb Optical Company, catalog 4619, at a list price of $5. After the focus has been correctly obtained, the shutter is closed, the plate holder inserted into the camera, and the slide withdrawn. Then the shutter is opened for the required length of time to make the exposure. The length of exposure required is learned only by experience, as it varies considerably, depending on the brightness or darkness of the object, the amount of illumination, and the magnification used. Just below the camera shutter there is an eyepiece projecting at right angles to the body of the instrument, which enables the specimen to be accurately focused on the plate merely by looking through this eyepiece. The view seen through this eyepiece is just the same as would be seen when looking down the tube of the microscope, hence it is not necessary to move the camera from above the microscope when making visual examinations. An object under the microscope can be viewed and examined as much as desired, and then when it appears correct through the horizontal eyepiece, the plate holder can be placed in the camera and the picture can be taken without any further focusing. This camera, Spencer number 645, is highly recommended on account of its convenience, simplicity of operation, and uniformity of results. Photomicrographic lenses. While we have been referring above to the taking of enlarged photographs through a microscope, the reader should clearly understand that a microscope is by no means necessary for taking enlarged photographs, for pictures with all the magnification necessary for bullet comparison work can be made with no other apparatus than a long bellows camera and a short focus lens. If the lens is placed close up to the object and the camera bellows is extended to the proper point, the picture will be much larger than the object. Using a lens of 48 mm, approximately 2 inches focal length, it is possible to take photographs magnified up to as much as 20 diameters. After it has been determined that the test bullet and the fatal bullet match, the corresponding lands and grooves of the fatal bullet and the test bullet should be photographed for comparison. This photographic work is usually done by an ordinary camera without the use of the microscope. For this purpose, the investigator will need a special lens known as the Spencer microteleplate or the Bosch & Lomb microtessor. These lenses are made in various focal lengths, but 48 mm is the most suitable for bullet work. They are made to fit on the tube of the microscope, but an adapter should be obtained to enable identical markings on 2 bullets fired from the same gun. Enlarged photographs such as this one can be made by any ordinary camera which has an extension bellows, such as the Kodak Rec Omar, fitted with a supplementary short focus lens which is regularly supplied with this camera at a small additional cost. Them to be used directly in the camera shutter. This adapter is regularly furnished by the makers of the lens for a small additional price. These short focus photographic lenses may be used on the microscope in place of the microscope objective for all the bullet work that has been described. They are more expensive than the ordinary microscope objective, but they have the important advantages of being more finely corrected and of having a diaphragm between the 2 elements of the lens. A diaphragm is absolutely necessary for good results in bullet photography, because when the diaphragm is closed down to a small opening, the depth of focus is increased and the parts of the bullet which are slightly above or below the focal plane can be clearly seen. Enlarged photographs. Everyone who has had any experience with picture taking knows that a small photograph may be enlarged to almost any size desired. It is therefore possible to take a small picture of a bullet and enlarge it to the same size that a microphotograph of it would have. However, the results are far from being the same in this case as they are when a real microphotograph is taken with either a camera and a short focus lens or with a camera and a compound microscope, as anyone who has studied the subject of microscopy will fully realize. When a microphotograph is taken, the lens is close enough to the object to separate points which lie very close together, and thus give resolution of detail. When an ordinary photograph is taken, the lens is too far away from the object to separate very close points, and enlarging the resulting photograph will not add any new detail. It merely spreads out what is already in the picture and gives what the microscopist calls empty magnification. Suppose, as an illustration of how this works, we take a picture of a ship showing ropes. We may enlarge this picture until the ropes appear as thick as a man's wrist, but we will not see any indication that the rope is composed of fine fibers twisted together. The line representing the rope merely gets wider and wider as we increase the enlargement, but it does not gain detail. On the other hand, if we take a close-up picture of the rope with a lens of say 2-inch focus, we can show the individual fibers with great clearness. It may be advisable at times to use enlarged photographs for demonstrations, etc. But the difference between an enlargement and a micrograph should be clearly understood. Bullet and shell photo stand. In making complete photographs of the bullets as referred to above, it is extremely convenient to have available a special photographing stand such as Spencer No. 620 illustrated herewith.